Think about the oldest human structure you have ever stood inside.
Oh, yeah, that is a great starting point.
Right. Like maybe it was a stone cathedral in Europe or, a ruined temple in South America.
Yeah.
Or honestly, even just a colonial building in your hometown.
Sure, something with some real history to it.
Exactly. And when you stand in those places, you feel the weight of like a few centuries pressing down on you.
Yeah.
You can kind of sense the gap between the architects who laid those stones and, well, the world we live in today.
It gives you that sense of scale, right? Like human scale.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I want you to take that sensation of historical weight and just scale it up to an incomprehensible degree.
Just blow it completely out of proportion.
Right. Imagine a civilization where the machinery, the architecture, like the very institutions governing daily life,
Mm-hmm.
they haven't just been standing for a few centuries. They have been crumbling and decaying and just relentlessly grinding on for 10,000 years.
Which is just, I mean, it's a number we can't even really picture.
No, we really can't. And we are not talking about a sudden, fiery apocalypse that wipes the slate clean in an afternoon.
Right, not a movie disaster.
Exactly. We are talking about a civilization trapped in a 10 millennia long death rattle.
Yeah, it fundamentally breaks the human capacity to understand time.
It really does. Which is why today on the deep dive, we are jumping into some incredibly dark source materials.
Yes, the excerpts from the text, Grim Darkness, the dying breath of the Imperium.
That's the one. And that vast, suffocating expanse of time is really the first hurdle you have to clear when you're looking at this stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are looking at a society that has completely forgotten its own genesis.
Like they don't even know where they came from.
Exactly. The foundational thesis of this text is that the 41st millennium, it is not a narrative as we traditionally understand it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there is no plot progression. There is no dramatic arc bending toward justice. There is no grand finale where the scattered forces of good rally to save the universe.
So no big hero moment.
None at all. The author specifically describes the setting of the Imperium as a static painting of absolute despair.
Wow. A static painting of absolute despair. That is bleak.
It really is. The golden age of their expansion, what they call the Great Crusade, that is just lost to myth.
Right.
And the catastrophic civil war that broke their empire is ancient, almost like mythological history to them.
So they are just living in the ruins of it.
Exactly. What remains is purely the status quo. And the status quo is, well, it's a waking nightmare.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive.
Oh,
We're taking you into the architecture of basically the ultimate dystopian society ever conceived.
The absolute rock bottom.
Yeah, pretty much. And to do this properly, you need to leave something very specific at the door, and that is your modern bias toward hope.
That is a really important point.
It is, right. You have to, completely discard the inherent belief that tomorrow will be technologically or socially or, I don't know, morally better than today.
Because for them, it definitely won't be.
Right. For the next hour or so, we are exploring a paradigm where humanity's only animating force is terrified survival.
It is a society running purely on momentum and institutional paranoia.
Institutional paranoia. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because when the fundamental belief that progress is a net positive is entirely stripped away, well, you are left with a culture that views the past as sacred and the future as a looming threat.
Okay, so let's examine the mechanics of how a society actually functions under those conditions.
Yeah.
Because you can't really understand a civilization without looking at how they interact with their tools, right?
Oh, totally. The tools tell the whole story.
Exactly. But here we aren't charting the development of the microchip or, the discovery of faster-than-light travel. We are looking at the active suppression and loss of scientific understanding.
The complete opposite of progress.
Right. The text dives deeply into this thing called the cult of the machine. It details how humanity survived these eras called the Dark Age of Technology and the Age of Strife, only to emerge with this profound, just terrifying amnesia regarding their own achievements.
Yeah, and the amnesia isn't incidental, right? It has been, codified into religion.
Wait, their lack of knowledge is a religion?
Basically, yeah. The text stresses that humanity in the 41st millennium does not understand its own infrastructure.
That is wild.
It is. The principles of physics, engineering, metallurgy, The things that allow their void ships to cross the galaxy or their plasma reactors to generate power, that knowledge is entirely lost.
So they don't know how to build the stuff they use every day.
Exactly. What you have is an entire galactic empire relying on machinery it is fundamentally incapable of recreating or comprehending.
And their methodology for maintaining this technology is where the text gets incredibly granular and honestly really disturbing.
Oh, the ritual of repair.
Yes, the ritual of repair.
Mm.
When I was reading through the logs of the tech priest, the Mechanicus,
Mm.
I actually had to stop and reread the passages because the cognitive dissonance is just so sharp.
Right, because it goes against everything we know about fixing things.
Completely.
Yeah.
Like when a macro cannon on a warship jams, the operators do not check the localized power grid, right? They don't inspect the physical loading mechanisms.
They don't troubleshoot the circuitry.
No, not at all. The tech priests arrive and immediately begin burning sacred incense.
Incense.
Yeah.
For a jammed cannon.
Yes. They chant binary algorithms
Mhm.
as if they were holy mantras to appease what they call the machine spirit.
Because the sequence of operations is entirely dogmatic for them.
Yeah.
They press the rune of activation, which is just a button, right? They press it in a specific holy order passed down over hundreds of generations.
Right. And they anoint the casing with sacred unguents. Oil, basically.
Yeah, sacred oil. And the tragedy, according to the text, is that sometimes this ritual actually works.
Which just reinforces the crazy behavior.
Exactly, because buried beneath the incense and the chanting, the specific sequence of buttons they press just happens to be the factory reset code.
That is so darkly funny.
Right, but they don't know why it works. They simply believe they have successfully appeased an animistic spirit residing within the machinery.
Okay, the psychological shift there is fascinating, but I find myself really struggling with the sheer scale of the inefficiency here.
It is hard to wrap your head around.
It is, because if you are operating a wartime economy, and the Imperium is essentially nothing but a wartime economy.
100%. Constant war.
Okay, so evolutionary pressure usually forces innovation.
Yeah.
Like, necessity is supposed to be the mother of invention.
That is the historical human norm, yes.
Right. So if the macro cannon is jamming, wouldn't the high command be screaming for the engineers to design a better macro cannon? I mean, why hasn't the sheer desperation of a galactic war forced them to relearn the scientific method?
Well, because you are looking at it through the lens of a society that values survival over dogma, whereas the Imperium values dogma over survival.
Wow.
Yeah. The text makes it explicit that to innovate is to imply the original design, which they believe was handed down by the machine god, was flawed.
Oh, so trying to improve it is an insult?
Exactly. That implies imperfection in the divine.
So it's basically blasphemy.
Yes. The psychological trauma of the Age of Strife, where rampant, uncontrolled technology nearly wiped out humanity, it created this hardwired cultural terror of the unknown.
So they are literally traumatized by past tech.
Right. They don't view a new invention as a path to victory. They view it as a direct invitation to another apocalypse.
Man.
So anyone attempting to, say, reverse engineer a plasma drive or improve a weapons yield, they are branded a heretic.
A heretic. Not a heretic, but a heretic.
Exactly. And it is a capital offense.
Which means the punishment for trying to build a better mousetrap is literally execution.
Immediate execution.
I keep trying to map this onto our relationship with technology, just to understand the psychological reality of the average imperial citizen.
Yeah, an analogy helps here.
So imagine a scenario where, a few generations from now, the supply chains for modern electronics completely collapse. But like, a few functioning smartphones survive.
Okay, I can picture that.
Right. Your great-grandchildren wouldn't know what a lithium-ion battery is. They wouldn't know how a touchscreen registers bioelectric capacitance.
Of course not. The engineers are all gone.
Exactly. They would just know that this little black rectangle is this magical obelisk that contains the sum of human knowledge, but only if you hold it at a specific angle, plug it into a sacred copper wire and pray to the glowing apple icon on the back.
That is a really solid comparison.
And if the screen cracks, you don't look for a repair shop. You assume you have angered the spirit of the obelisk, and you offer a blood sacrifice to make it glow again.
And that analogy hits the core mechanism perfectly, especially regarding the sacrifices.
Wait, the text actually talks about blood sacrifice.
Oh, yeah. The text outlines that when a machine spirit is particularly angry, the tech priests will literally sacrifice a servitor.
A servitor. What is that exactly?
Yeah. Well, we know from the lore that a servitor is a lobotomized human.
Oh my God.
Yeah. They are hardwired with cybernetics and used for menial labor, and they will dismantle these human beings to appease, like, A tank engine.
To fix a tank, they'd chop up a cyborg slave.
Yes. You have a civilization that is actively regressing. The starships they are constructing today are objectively inferior to the ones built 1,000 years ago.
Which were inferior to the ones 5,000 years ago.
Exactly. When a manufactorum, which is basically a giant factory, when one of those that produces a specific pattern of bolter ammunition is destroyed in a siege, that design is gone.
Like, they can never make it again.
Forever. The Imperium isn't just losing territory, right? It is steadily bleeding its own capacity to function.
But, okay, when a society fundamentally abandons technological efficiency, the slack has to be picked up somewhere.
Right. You still have to produce things.
Exactly. If you cannot automate your supply chains, if you cannot rely on advanced agricultural algorithms or, automated terraforming, how do you sustain the sheer crushing mass of a galactic civilization?
You don't innovate. You extract.
You extract.
Mm-hmm.
And the only resource the Imperium has in infinite abundance is human bodies.
Which brings us to the brutal logistics of the Hive City.
Yes, the hive cities. This part of the text was just so claustrophobic.
The text indicates that the vast majority of humanity resides in these planetary urban structures. But to call them cities is an almost comical understatement.
Right, they aren't like New York or Tokyo.
No, a hive city is a closed-loop logistical nightmare that extends from the irradiated crust of a dead planet all the way up into the stratosphere.
The verticality of it is what strikes me as so deeply symbolic, but also, physically impossible without massive human suffering.
The structure is the suffering, basically.
Yeah, because the spires at the very top, they are essentially orbital country clubs. You have planetary governors and merchant lords living in artificial sunlight. Right.
Yeah, surrounded by genetically resurrected flora.
Totally insulated from the consequences of the universe.
And supporting that razor-thin strata of extreme luxury is the underhive.
The underhive. Just the name is bleak.
It really is. We are talking hundreds of billions of people crammed into a hyper-dense, decaying industrial labyrinth.
Hundreds of billions on a single planet.
Yes, and the text is very clear about the atmospheric realities here. Down in the mid to lower levels, natural light is just a myth.
They never see the sun.
Never. The air is heavily filtered but still toxic. It's laden with heavy metals and the exhaust of 1 billion manufactorums.
So everyone is just breathing smog from birth.
Exactly. The water is recycled, purified just barely enough to keep the workforce from dying of immediate toxicity. And the primary sustenance is corpse starch.
Okay, I want to focus on corpse starch for a second because it is the detail from the text that physically repulsed me the most.
It is a lot to stomach, literally.
Yeah, but logically, it makes horrific sense. If a planet has a population of 300 billion people, there is no arable land left.
None. The biosphere is dead.
Right, so when a worker dies on the assembly line, their body isn't buried.
No, there's no space for graveyards.
Right. It goes into the reclamator plants, where it is chemically broken down, sanitized, and reprocessed into nutritional rations to feed the next shift of workers.
It is the ultimate manifestation of human commodification. Your value to the Imperium does not end when your heart stops beating.
They literally eat their dead to keep working.
Your physical matter is simply reallocated to maintain the caloric baseline of the labor force.
That is just horrifying.
The text notes that the average lifespan for a worker in these lower levels is barely 30 years.
30 years. And what a life it is.
Right. It is a life consisting of 18-hour shifts assembling las guns, punctuated by sleep in a hablock the size of a closet, consuming the recycled remains of your predecessors.
Okay, here is where I really have to push back on the sociological model the text is presenting.
Okay, go ahead.
Because history dictates that when you push a population to absolute zero, when they have literally nothing left to lose, right? When they are dying at 30 from lung rot and eating their grandfathers, they riot.
That is the usual human response, yes.
Exactly. The instinct for self-preservation usually overrides the fear of authority. A desperate population will tear down the factory just to feel the sun on their face.
Sure.
So what is the actual mechanism keeping these billions of people tethered to the assembly line? Why doesn't the underhive just boil over and consume the spires?
Because the Imperium doesn't rely solely on the physical enforcement of the arbitrators, which are their militarized police.
Right. Police can only do so much against billions of people.
Exactly. They rely on the deliberate weaponization of ignorance and spiritual terror.
Spiritual terror.
Yes. The ecclesiarchy, the state church, controls the entire narrative of existence.
So they brainwash them from day one.
Completely. From the moment an imperial citizen is born, they are subjected to a level of psychological conditioning that makes modern propaganda look rudimentary.
Like, how far does it go?
They are taught that the emperor of mankind is a literal, omnipotent god, and that their endless toil is a sacred duty.
Wow. So the architecture of the mine matches the architecture of the hive.
Exactly that. And it's not just that they are taught to love the emperor, they are taught a paralyzing fear of the alternative.
What's the alternative?
Well, the text emphasizes that the citizen is kept completely ignorant of the actual shape of the galaxy. They don't know the names of other planets or the political realities of the Imperium.
So they are totally isolated.
Right. What they do know is that mutants, heretics, and aliens are lurking in the shadows.
The boogeymen.
Yes, but real ones. And they are taught that questioning their lot in life isn't just a secular crime like breaking a law.
What is it then?
It is a spiritual contagion that will result in the literal damnation of their soul to a realm of infinite torment.
So the fear of what happens after death, a
Right.
death they firmly believe will be much, much worse than grinding out lasguns that overrides the suffering of life.
It is the ultimate control mechanism.
The psychological weight pressing down on the underhive is far heavier than the physical miles of steel and concrete above them.
Oh, without a doubt.
They are trapped in a panopticon of their own religious terror. But, this leads us to the output of all this suffering.
The whole reason they are working?
Right. Trillions of citizens across the galaxy spending their short, miserable lives building lasguns and artillery shells. Where is it all going?
The front lines.
Exactly. The text details the overarching strategy of the Imperium's military,
They have
and it is just a doctrine of sheer attrition.
the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard.
Yeah, let's talk about him.
The text describes a conflict spanning 1,000,000 worlds simultaneously.
1,000,000 worlds, just the logistics of that.
The logistical burden of this is almost impossible to fathom. We are talking about lifting billions of human beings out of the hive cities, processing them through the administratum, which is the bureaucracy.
And the text mentions the administratum is incredibly bloated, right?
Yeah. Unbelievably bloated. The text literally mentions entire regiments starving to death in the void of space because a scribe misfiled a shipping manifest.
Oh my God. Just dead in space because of a typo.
Exactly. And the ones that survive the trip are thrown into meat grinders across the galaxy.
The juxtaposition here between, typical sci-fi military and the Astra Militarum is really jarring.
Oh, so?
Well, we're conditioned to expect highly trained operators in power armor with, advanced tactical uplinks and lasers.
Right, the super soldiers.
But the bulk of the Imperial Guard are just regular humans, and they're equipped with flak jackets that offer negligible protection against the weaponry they're facing and a standard lasgun.
The text highlights the grim reality of the lasgun. Against unarmored targets, sure, it's effective.
But they aren't fighting unarmored targets.
Exactly. Against the horrors of the 41st millennium, the guardsmen themselves refer to it derogatorily as a flashlight.
A flashlight. That is so bleak.
Because they are facing biologically engineered super soldiers, towering alien monstrosities, and ancient war engines, the individual guardsman is just completely outmatched.
Which means the doctrine relies entirely on mathematics, not tactics.
Pure numbers.
Yeah. The text outlines the operational strategy. If an invasion force lands on an Imperial world, Command doesn't orchestrate a surgical counterattack. They just begin pouring human bodies into the breach.
Drowning them in blood.
Literally. They drown the enemy in corpses until the invading force either expends all its ammunition or the sheer biomass of dead guardsmen clogs their tank treads.
It is a horrific image.
The life expectancy of a frontline trooper in these war zones isn't measured in campaigns or even weeks. It is measured in hours.
It is the brutal realization that human life is the cheapest commodity in the Imperium's arsenal.
Cheaper than the gun they hold.
Much cheaper. It is far easier to conscript 1,000,000 more men from a hive city than it is to manufacture a single new tank. They spend human lives like loose change simply to buy time.
But wait, this brings up the most contradictory element of their defensive strategy, in my opinion.
Oh.
Let's look at the exterminatus protocols. The virus bombing?
Ah, yes. The ultimate sanction.
Right. If the Imperial commanders realize that the sheer weight of bodies isn't holding the line, and a planet is inevitably falling to the enemy, they will authorize a strike from orbit that deploys viral payloads designed to consume all biological matter.
It strips the planet down to bedrock.
Yes. But if you virus bomb a planet, you lose the manufacturing base, the population, the tide, the entire infrastructure you were fighting to protect in the first place.
It is a localized suicide.
Exactly. How does the High Command justify wiping their own worlds off the map?
It is the ultimate manifestation of the sunk cost fallacy applied on a galactic scale mixed with a policy of absolute denial.
Denial of what?
The Imperium is fundamentally incapable of conceding a strategic victory to the enemy. If they cannot hold the asset, they will ensure the asset is rendered completely useless.
So if I can't have it, nobody can.
Precisely. It is a mathematical equation to them. Denying the enemy the resources of a conquered world is calculated as a net positive, even if it permanently shrinks the borders of the Imperium.
It's scorched Earth taken to its most extreme cosmic conclusion.
That is exactly what it is.
That makes the existence of the Space Marines almost tragic.
The Adeptus Astartes.
Right. Because they are the elite, heavily armored, genetically modified shock troops. They are the scalpel to the Guard's sledgehammer.
They are the posters of the Imperium.
But the text provides a logistical reality check that just strips away all their glory. There are only about 1 million Space Marines in existence.
Which sounds like a lot until you do the math.
Right. In a galactic empire containing untold quadrillions of humans, 1 million troops is a statistical rounding error.
Exactly. They are spread impossibly thin.
You can't cover 1 million worlds with 1 million guys.
You can't. The text notes that entire subsectors of the galaxy are abandoned to alien incursions simply because a Space Marine chapter cannot physically reach them in time.
So they're basically just firefighters running from one blazing inferno to another.
Yeah. And they perform impossible feats of heroism. They win battles that would break 100 guard regiments. But strategically, they're just a delaying mechanism.
Because there are just too many threats.
The borders of the Imperium are retracting. The text uses this really evocative metaphor. It says, the map of the Imperium is like a piece of parchment curling up and turning black as it's held too close to a candle flame.
Oh, wow. That is a powerful image.
They're bleeding territory planet by planet.
And look, if the slow decay of technological regression, the crushing squalor of the hive cities, and the infinite meat grinder of the Astra Militarum were the only factors, the Imperium would eventually collapse under the weight of its own stagnation anyway.
It would just be a matter of time.
Right. But the universe isn't going to afford them a slow, quiet death. Let's look at the external pressures accelerating this collapse, because the source material introduces 2 apex predators that make the internal decay look, honestly, manageable.
Oh, yeah. We have to talk about the Necrons and the Tyranids.
Yes, let's start with the Necrons.
The Necrons represent the horror of the deep past returning. According to the text, these are not recent enemies. They are a civilization of robotic, living metal entities that went into hibernation 60 million years ago.
60 million years. I just want to contextualize that for a second. They went to sleep before the dinosaurs were entirely wiped out on Earth.
Yep. Deep time.
Humanity's entire evolutionary journey is just a blip that occurred while the Necrons were taking a nap.
Pretty much. And they built tomb worlds deep beneath the crust of planets, waiting out some ancient cataclysm. And now, across the galaxy, those tomb worlds are waking up.
And the text describes them as immortal. Not just long-lived, but fundamentally incapable of permanent death.
That is the terrifying mechanical reality of the Necrons. They are constructed of a living metal that dynamically reknits itself from damage.
So you shoot them, and the metal just flows back together.
Exactly. But more disturbingly, if you manage to hit a Necron warrior with enough concentrated firepower to vaporize its chassis, you haven't destroyed it.
Wait, if you vaporize it, how is it not destroyed?
The text explains that its consciousness, its engramic data, instantly phases out and uploads back to a central crypt on the tomb world, where it is downloaded into a fresh body.
Oh, come on. That is just unfair.
They feel no pain, they possess no fear, and they do not suffer from the logistical constraints of morale or supply lines.
Yeah, so you take the Imperial Guard, a force composed of terrified humans dying in hours, and pit them against a legion of silent, soulless metal skeletons that literally respawn when you kill them.
It is not a fair fight.
The attritional warfare doctrine of the Imperium fundamentally breaks against an enemy that doesn't experience attrition.
Exactly. But they aren't just mindless automatons. The text delves into their command structure. They are ruled by megalomaniacal overlords who have retained their personalities and their staggering arrogance.
So they have egos.
Huge egos. They view the galaxy as their rightful property.
So from the perspective of a Necron overlord, the human Imperium isn't a rival civilization.
No, it is an infestation of vermin that has grown over their ancestral estates.
Wow.
When a tomb world awakens, and many of these tomb worlds happen to be deep beneath heavily populated imperial planets.
Of course they are.
Right, they don't initiate diplomacy. They begin a systematic, emotionless extermination process to clear the mold off their property.
To clear the mold, it is the chilling arrogance of an ancient technological past.
Mhm.
But what fascinates me is the contrast between the Necrons and the other major threat outlined in the text.
The Tyranids.
Right. The Necrons are immortal metal beings, some of whom actually wish to reverse their state and regain their mortal flesh, right?
Yes, some of the overlords want biological bodies again.
Meanwhile, the Tyranids represent a threat that views all mortal flesh as basically a cosmic buffet.
If the Necrons are an ancient technological plague, the Tyranids are a self-sustaining biological extinction event.
A biological extinction event.
The text describes them as an extragalactic threat. The initial warning signs weren't invading armadas, but the realization by Imperial astropaths that entire neighboring galaxies were simply going dark.
Going dark. The light was being snuffed out.
Literally.
Which is such a deeply unsettling concept. It's not a political empire expanding its borders,
Yeah.
It is a creeping darkness.
The Tyranids are not a species in the traditional sense. They are a hyper-adaptive biological soup connected to a singular overriding consciousness.
The hive mind.
Yes, the
What?
hive mind. Everything from the smallest microscopic spore to the massive living bioships that dwarf imperial dreadnoughts is a single organism with one purpose: consumption.
The methodology of their invasion is what sets them apart, I think.
Oh, absolutely. They do not conquer planets to occupy them or exploit their strategic value.
No, they don't care about factories or borders.
The text details a process they call the harvest.
The harvest.
When a Tyranid hive fleet descends on a world, they don't just kill the defenders, they consume the entire biosphere.
Like everything.
Everything. They ingest the atmosphere, they drink the oceans, they strip the minerals from the topsoil. In a matter of weeks, a vibrant, populated world is reduced to a barren, airless sphere of bedrock.
Just a floating rock in space.
And every ounce of that consumed biomass is funneled back into the bioships to gestate millions more Tyranids.
It is a terrifying biological feedback loop. But, the physical destruction isn't even the most deeply terrifying aspect of the Tyranids, according to the text.
Oh, you mean the shadow?
Yes, the source material spends a significant amount of time detailing a phenomenon known as the shadow in the warp.
The shadow in the warp is arguably their most devastating weapon. The Tyranids possess such a massive, chaotic psychic presence that their sheer proximity creates a static interference in the warp.
And the warp is the alternate dimension the Imperium relies on for all faster-than-light travel and communication, right?
Yes, exactly.
Let's dissect the implications of that. The physical isolation is one thing, but taking away the astropathic choirs, the psychics who send messages across the galaxy that severs the only nerve endings the Imperium has.
It blinds and deafens them.
If a system falls into the shadow in the warp, they cannot call for reinforcements. They cannot coordinate an evacuation. They are entirely cut off from the rest of humanity.
Completely isolated.
Does the shadow in the warp make the Tyranids the scariest threat of all? Precisely because it strips away the last vestige of Imperial cohesion. Like, you are locked in the dark with a predator, and your screams literally cannot be heard by the rest of the universe.
It creates absolute localized despair, which fits perfectly into the broader themes of the text.
It really does.
But what is truly remarkable is the macro-strategic irony playing out between these two cosmic horrors.
The Necrons and the Tyranids.
Yes. The text highlights a specific narrative thread involving the Silent King. He is the supreme ruler of the Necrons. He returned from exile outside the galaxy for one specific reason. He encountered the Tyranids in the void between galaxies and recognized them as the ultimate threat to all existence.
Wait. So the supreme leader of the immortal, indestructible robot skeletons looked out into the dark, saw the Tyranids coming, and decided he needed to rush back and wake up his legions because the Tyranids are actually going to eat the galaxy.
Precisely. The Silent King realizes that if the Tyranids consume all biological matter, the Necrons will never be able to reverse their condition and regain flesh and blood bodies.
Because there won't be any flesh left in the galaxy.
Exactly. They will rule over a galaxy of dead rocks. So he is attempting to unify the Necron dynasties to wage an apocalyptic war against the hive mind.
And where does humanity fit into this clash of titans?
Humanity is entirely irrelevant to the grand calculus.
Just totally sidelined.
In a war between an infinitely expanding biological swarm and an indestructible ancient metal legion, the Imperium of Man is nothing more than collateral damage. The battleground just happens to be the planets they live on.
Which brings us to the core underlying philosophy of this entire deep dive.
The big picture.
Yeah. When you synthesize all of this, the active suppression of technology and the religious cult of the machine, the unimaginable claustrophobic squalor of a hive city where you literally eat your dead,
Right.
the hopeless, infinite meat grinder of a war where millions are sacrificed for a few hours of delay, and the realization that the galaxy is being contested by apex predators who view you as either mold or food. When you combine all that, you arrive at the fundamental truth of the 41st millennium.
The defining characteristic of the age of the Imperium is absolute stasis.
Stasis. Just being stuck.
Stuck forever. For 10,000 years, humanity has experienced zero forward momentum. There is no evolution, no enlightenment, no diplomatic breakthroughs.
Just holding the line.
They are trapped in an endless holding pattern. The author of the text uses a brilliant phrase, describing the Imperium as a corpse that refuses to fall over.
A corpse that refuses to fall over. That imagery is so visceral. It is a societal zombie.
A societal zombie, exactly.
The intellectual mind of the civilization died during the Age of Strife. The physical body is rotting away as planets fall one by one to invasions or virus bombs. But the muscle memory is still firing.
That's a great way to put it.
The factories are still churning out lasguns. The ships are still moving troops, purely out of religious reflex and institutional terror.
And at the center of this sprawling nightmare is the Emperor of Mankind.
Right. The guy they worship.
The being who, 10,000 years ago, supposedly championed science, reason, and a secular truth, is now ironically worshipped as a god.
That is the ultimate irony.
It is. He's interred on the Golden Throne, described in the text as a rotting skeleton screaming in psychic agony, acting as a cosmic lighthouse to keep the Empire connected.
So he's suffering just as much as everyone else.
More, probably. The empire he sought to build based on enlightenment has mutated into the most brutal regime imaginable, sustained by the very superstitions he tried to eradicate.
Which forces a really uncomfortable moral question.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this.
If the emperor hates what his empire has become, and if the human experience in this era is entirely defined by suffering, ignorance, and oppression, are the humans of the 41st millennium actually the villains of their own story?
It's a valid question based on the text.
They are perpetuating this nightmare.
Yeah.
Humanity endures not out of some noble, indomitable spirit, but because they are too brainwashed, too fundamentally broken, and too paralyzed by fear to do anything but continue the cycle.
It is a fascinating psychological phenomenon scaled up to a galactic level. You see this in human behavior on a micro scale, right?
Like what?
Like individuals remaining in deeply toxic environments, abusive relationships, soul-crushing jobs, simply because the energy required to initiate change feels insurmountable.
The devil you know is better than the devil you don't.
Exactly. The fear of the unknown void is more paralyzing than the misery they understand. The Imperium is that specific psychological paralysis, institutionalized across millions of worlds and sustained over 10 millennia.
They are too scared to change, even if change means salvation.
They fight fiercely, but they are not fighting to win. They are fighting desperately just to ensure that tomorrow is exactly as terrible as today, because the alternative is extinction.
So we have napped the architecture of the ultimate dystopia. We've walked from the incense-choked garages of the tech priests trying to pray a tank engine back to life, down into the radioactive, corpse-starch-fed depths of the hive cities.
It has been a dark journey.
We've examined the grim mathematics of the Imperial Guard, standing in the mud waiting to be ground into dust. And we've stared out into the void at the Necrons and Tyranids closing in to finish the job.
It is a masterpiece of world building precisely because it systematically removes every single exit door.
Which leaves us with a final, highly provocative thought to consider, drawing on the strategic reality the sources have laid out.
And this is where it gets really interesting.
The Imperium's greatest enemy is its own stagnation, right? It is a rotting empire that only generates suffering. Meanwhile, the only force in the galaxy that seems practically capable of halting the Tyranid extinction event is the awakened might of the ancient Necrons.
I think I see where you're going with this, and it is a deeply unsettling conclusion.
I mean, we have to ask, is the best-case scenario for the galaxy actually the complete collapse and annihilation of the human empire.
Wow.
If humanity's desperate, terrified struggle to survive is tying up the resources needed to fight the hive mind, what if humanity itself is the obstacle?
The stumbling block.
What if their stubborn refusal to die is the very thing preventing the universe from finally resetting and finding some form of post-biological peace?
Are we the infection keeping the galaxy sick just to drag out our own agonizing death?
Exactly. That is a truly haunting thought to leave you with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material.
It has been intense.
It has been incredibly dark and dense, but diving into this absolute nadir of human existence forces us to look in the mirror. It challenges our assumptions about the inevitability of progress, the inherent value of survival at any cost, and the cold, unfeeling realities lurking in the dark spaces between the stars. I want you to mull over that cosmic irony. Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't a sudden apocalypse. It is an apocalypse that never stops.